Welcome everybody to Think You Know Wine. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're so excited to have you here today on our first broadcast of 2021. And just a bit of housekeeping for everyone as you come on into the room for today. If you do want to adjust the way that your screen is being shown, just go up to the sidebar and you can click view options and go into gallery view. You can also change the size of how our critics look and what you're seeing throughout the evening. But welcome to Think You Know Wine, everyone. We are joined by some amazing critics from Wine-A-Line. Wine-A-Line is Canada's largest wine review site. They review thousands of wines a year, and they're going to be reviewing some more really soon, so I'm super happy to hear what they have to say. So we have our critics with us this evening. First up, we have Sara D'Amato. Sara, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well, thanks. Glad to be back in this edition of You Think You Know Wine. Bottles here already, nice and chilled, ready to go.
Fantastic. Next up, we have Michael Godel. Hello, Michael. Good evening.
Hi, Renee. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to all. Glad you're joining us again.
Then we also have John Szabo with us this evening. Hi, John. How are you doing?
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Great to see so many people from all across Canada joining us here. Welcome. So glad to have you. I guess, what else are we going to be doing on a Saturday night? Nobody watching football out there, or maybe saving that for later.
Record that. And David Lawrason is our last critic with us this evening. Welcome, David. How are you doing?
I'm just doing great. Thank you. Great to be here. Great to be back doing this. It's becoming an institution, and we're really happy with the response we're getting. And I'm so glad so many of you are joining us tonight.
Amazing. So our critics are going to be tasting 3 wines this evening, and we're just going to go over the ground rules before we kick things off a little bit. And they'll be tasting 3 wines. They'll have the opportunity to score 10 points per wine, 3 for varietal, 2 for country, 1 for region, 1 for appellation, 2 for vintage, plus or minus a year. They lose a point either way, and 1 for price within a 30% margin, 15% above and 15% below. But before we kick off, we are going to have some polls coming up this evening just to give you guys a heads up on that. And I'll let you know when the first one is coming. But I wanted to ask our critics, since we're at the beginning of a brand new year, what their predictions are, their wine predictions are for 2021. I'm going to throw it over to David first. What is your quick prediction for 2021?
Quick prediction that by the end of this year, the LCBO as we know it will be quite different from how we know it now. I predict with the rise of bottle shops and people being able to sell wine and hopefully very soon being able to buy it wholesale, that we'll see much more competition in Ontario for the fine wine market. And I think a lot of that will shift away from the LCBO.
That's amazing news to hear. I love that prediction. Sara, what is your prediction for 2021?
No, I think sparkling wine is going to be the new courting commodity of 2021. I think with all of the vaccinations, people are going to be celebrating so much that there might not be enough for New Year's Eve. We'll see, but sparkling wine makes up about 10% of the world's wine production. Most of that's in Europe, so I think it's time for the new world to step up and start producing a little bit more bubbly. Hopefully we'll see that this year.
Yeah, let's see who's stepping up their game. If there's any wine makers on with us, let us know later. Michael, what is your quick prediction for 2021?
Well, my quick prediction is not as game or life-changing as David's or Sarah's, I suppose. But my prediction is that Nebbiolo will be the darling grape of 2021. That it'll go way beyond Barolo and Barbaresco and the Nebbiolo d'Alba, Nebbiolo Langhe, Nebbiolo in general, affordable, clean, crisp, light. Everybody's going to be drinking it.
Amazing. And John, what are your quick predictions for 2021?
Normally, I would say that Blaufränkisch is going to be the grape of the future, but it already is. So I'm going to give you a more predictable prediction, which is that I think the word natural as it applies to wine is going to disappear as quickly as it appeared a couple of years ago. And we won't be talking about natural wine. We'll be talking just about good wine and better wine and great wine. And then attached to that good, better, and best and fine, there'll be some notion of sustainability and organics. I really think that sustainability is maybe the most important topic in the world of wine today. Everybody is talking about it, wants to talk about it, and is happily headed in that direction. And I think that's a sine qua non of fine wine these days.
I think those are all great predictions, and thank you, critics, for giving out your thoughts for this year. We are going to put our first poll up for tonight, just going to run over a couple of bits of other things. So if you have any questions for our critics, as our poll is going to be going up right now, so please feel free to vote. If you have any questions for our critics this evening, just put them in the Q&A section below. For direct questions, just in there, a little bit easier for us to find than in the chat box. You see our poll has gone up. I'm going to keep it up for the next 30 seconds. And to, again, if you missed beforehand, to adjust your view to a gallery view to see everybody more fully. And for scoring tonight, our critics are going to be tasting 3 wines, and they have the opportunity to score 10 points per wine. We're going to have our scoring wizards come up in the background after each and every single wine. Our critics will be able to score 3 points for varietal, 2 points for the country, 1 point for the region, 1 for the appellation, 2 for vintage, plus or minus a year. They'll get 1 point off. If they're way off, they get no point at all. And 1 point for price within a 30% range, 15% above and 15% below. That will get them that point as well. So it's going to keep our poll up for a little bit longer, and then we're going to be taking it down. And while that's up there, critics, I'm going to ask you guys to show the first wine and pour it into your glass. So if you have wine number 1, you can give it a little bit of a show and pour it into your glass. We're going to get this evening started. Some of you guys get to pour it into your glass, and we're going to send our critics, after they do that, into the critics lounge. We'll take down our poll at this time. Seems like most of you are doing tonight's wines in your glass, and that's absolutely amazing. Fantastic. If you are drinking any other wine, that's awesome too. So we're going to pull our critics into the critics lounge so that they can get a chance to take a look at this wine, give it a smell, give it a taste, acclimate themselves with it. So we're going to say goodbye to our critics for a quick moment, and I'm going to tell all of you guys what the wine is beforehand so we can see how close they get. Goodbye, critics. We got 2 more left to go. Sarah and Michael. Ciao, Sarah. See you soon. All right. Everybody ready to find out what wine number 1 is? Let me just share my screen really quickly. All right. So wine number 1 that our critics are trying to decipher is the Ken Forrester Old Vine Reserve Chenin Blanc. The varietal is Chenin. It's from South Africa. The region is Stellenbosch. The vintage is 2019, and the price is $17.95. And we're going to bring our critics back into the room and kick off this evening. Hopefully they've had a good amount of time to enjoy the wine. And as we go, guys, there'll be some more polls coming up so that you can vote on who you think is going to be getting closest, who's you're in the running to win each and every single round. Everybody feeling good? Everyone's feel like they have a good sense of wine number 1? Sarah, I'm going to throw it over to you first. What are your first thoughts on wine number 1?
I think it's a little bit tricky. I initially smelt some lees aging, so there's kind of a toasty note to it. Oftentimes that you find in champagne, following the theme of sparkling wine, but there is some of that character here. I also think that there's something almost a little bit tropical, like pineapple to it, and it's quite bright, but it's got some texture and mouthfeel.
Nice. Michael, what are your first thoughts on wine number 1?
I think Sarah's hit the nail on the head. There is something tropical. So the palate, like going straight to the palate, it gives you an impression of sweetness. It's not it's a dry wine, but it gives you that impression. So I don't find it overtly aromatic. It's light, crisp, fresh. There's something herbal to it, but definitely something tropical, peach, pineapple on the palate.
Amazing. David, what are your first thoughts on wine number 1? David, I'm so sorry, but you are on mute. We'd love to hear your amazing voice.
There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, I agree with the comments. It's sort of a tropical, sort of peachy nose. And so you might have thought, or I originally thought by the nose, it's probably New World, but there's a lovely tenderness on the palate here and balance. The alcohol is not very high, and the acid is sort of moderate, and there's this nice, gentle, tender feel that I really like.
Amazing. And last but not least for this round, John, what are your first thoughts on wine number one?
It's a tough wine, certainly not one that jumps out of the glass and speaks to me, at least. You know, for me, it's kind of medium all down the way from, you know, the aromatic intensity to the acid to the alcohol. Fruit is pretty ripe, as we've all discussed, but there's really no strong aromatic varietal signature here that I can really pick up on. So for me, this fits into a whole lot of potential pockets around the world.
Amazing. All right.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. Let's see if how close our critics score. Sarah, I'm going back over to you. What do you think wine number one is? Remember, we are going for, you have to tell me the varietal, the country, the region, the appellation, the vintage, and the price.
Okay. You know, to me, it's tricky because of that peachy characteristic and also that roundness from lees. I was thinking Chenin Blanc for a little while. And then I was also thinking Muscadet at one point, but it just doesn't have the hit of acid. Could it be, you know, something Chardonnay-like? But I think at the end of the day, I'm going to go with Pinot Gris. Pinot Gris, because Pinot Gris often has some of that peachy character to it. So Pinot Gris, and I'm going to say it's a dry style, relatively dry style from Alsace. And I'm going to say maybe 2018. Alsace, France, 2018. Price on this, $24.
All right, Michael, I'm going back over to you. Did Sarah sway you in any way? What do you think wine number one is?
I will be honest with you that I have an original thought, and when my second thought was Pinot Gris, and I'm so tempted to agree with Sarah, but I think that there's a pulse to this wine that takes me somewhere else, and that peach tropical note also takes me there. So I'm going to stick to my original thought, as crazy as it may sound, and I'm going to say this is Albarino. I'm going to say it's from Spain, from Rioja, and I think it's 2019. Let's say $18.
$18. All right. David, over to you. You knew I was coming back to you. What do you think wine number one is?
Okay, well, I'm going to give a slightly different answer. You know, Pinot Gris was the first thing that popped to my mind again on the nose, but the palate, I found this lovely tenderness. I also got a lovely sort of wildflower note in it, and it sent me to Italy. And lots of great white wines in Italy with a certain cleanness and tenderness to them. I keep coming back to that word tender. So I'm going to go Italy. I'm going to go, the variety is probably Garganega. I think it's from the Soave region of Veneto. And I'm going to go 2018 again. A couple of ripe vintages in Europe, 2018, 19. A lot of the wines are smelling quite tropical out of Europe in those 2 years. But I'll go 2018 and I'll go 23.95.
All right. And last but certainly not least on this round, we have John Szabo. John, what do you think wine number one is?
Well, what an eclectic group of guesses we have so far.
No kidding.
No.
And I'm just going to go right out ahead and say, don't vote for me, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to get this one wrong, but I'm going to go somewhere a little different myself just to keep things interesting. I have to say I was in the old world from the start just because of the discreetness of this wine. And I did also go to Italy, but not Veneto, not Soave, with Garganega. I found a little saline Mediterranean herbal tinge in this wine that took me to the Tuscan coast with a variety called Vermentino, known a little bit further up the coast in Provence as Rolle, but even there, they're starting to call it Vermentino. I would like it to be a little bit more if it were an absolute classic. It's a more subtle version of it, if it is, which it may not well be, but I think it's a 2019 Vermentino from the Maremma, Toscana, around $20, 1995.
All right, we're going to throw our poll up really, really quickly just to see who we're voting for at this point. We have all of our critics' thought processes that are in here right now. I know our team on the back end is working on a couple of other things just to make this evening as amazing as possible. So quickly, everybody, whenever hear my voice, place your vote. Who do you think is most correct for wine number 1? And then we are going to go to our big reveal for the first wine of the night. So, all right, votes are pouring in, everyone. We have a lot more going so far.
But wait a
It's
sec,
looking-
don't they already know what the wine is?
Yeah.
So they'll know which one of us was well off and who was on.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway.
They do, but
They should.
we'll see how it goes.
Show us the wine before the
You'll vote
results.
for me.
All right, all right. So we're going to be taking our poll down in a moment or so. So please, everybody, place your votes. All right, let's take it down really quickly. All right, so Michael, you are the fan favorite for this round, and wine number 1 to share it with all of you guys is the Ken Forrester Old Vine Reserve Chenin Blanc. And
Oh my
Chenin
God.
Blanc is the varietal. It's from South Africa. It's from the Stellenbosch region, and it's from 2019. The price is $17.95. Sarah, I was so rooting for you when you said Chenin Blanc.
It is such a good
almost
wine,
there.
such a great value.
It's a good wine. Yeah.
It is. We're going to turn to our scoring wizards in the background to see how our critics did this round and see who's gotten closest. You guys all guessed different varietals, so I'm curious to see how we're going in our scoring. Michael, you were our dark horse for the evening. Well, our fan favorite voted, and you and John have both scored 3 points in this round. David and Sarah, you have both scored a point in this round. I believe you guys both got the vintage correct. So that's absolutely amazing. And we're gonna,
Yeah, right.
hey, there's opportunity to
Thank you
pick up
very
points.
much, Renee.
I'm sorry, but there's gonna be opportunity to pick up points. I
Oh, yeah,
promise
it's sweet.
there is. All right, so we're gonna take that down. Somebody in the background was like, what? Sarah won? Sarah we'll see how everybody does. Everybody has it's just the first wine, everyone that's watching. We'll see how our critics do. It could sway at any point. It's anyone's game.
I'd like to send my 3 points back. I feel a little guilty taking any points out of that round, so you can just
Yeah,
wipe that
no
off.
kidding.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. We did have a question come up for the audience just to show the bottle again one more time. So for everybody that's curious, this is the Ken Forrester Old Vine Reserve Chenin Blanc. It's the 2019 vintage. You can check that out right there. And then we are going to move on to wine number 2. Critics, if you can show us wine number 2, we have no tricks going on tonight. Everything is completely sealed. They haven't tried the wines before. Nothing up this sleeve, I promise. So we are going to get our critics to pour that wine into their glass, and we're going to send them into the critics lounge for a moment so that we can see what wine number 2 is going to be. All right, everybody ready? I'm going to show you guys wine number 2. So wine number 2 for this evening is the Ramirez de la Piscina. It's the Rioja Crianza. The varietal is Tempranillo. It's from Spain. It's from Rioja. The vintage is 2015, and the price is $17.95. So we're going to hope our critics get as close as possible to this varietal. We're going to bring them back into the room now. And as we go about, don't forget, we do have our Q&A box down at the bottom. If you have any questions for our critics, anything at all, just pop them into the Q&A and I'll be sure to ask them. And keep up this amazing chat that everybody has going on. Seems like everyone's sharing their own impressions of the wines from this evening, and we 100% are on board with that. We fully subscribe. All right. So, how are we doing, critics? Are we feeling confident?
Never confident.
We're never confident. All right. Well, I'm going to throw it over to John for wine number 2. What do you think wine number 2 is to kick things off?
Initial thought, immediately smelling in the glass, was American oak. I got melted butter and cedar wood and cedar, sandalwood, these sort of things. Lots of baking spice, which immediately takes me to a few places in the world, not a handful, but aren't that many that make this style of wine. Pretty plummy fruit, ripe, warm, generous, but also well structured. Good wine, I have to say. I mean, lots of depth, lots of length, lots of character. I think this is a well-made wine from a certain place, from a certain grape.
That doesn't give a lot away. Amazing. I'm going to throw it over to you, David. Next, David, what do you think is going on with wine number 2?
Well, certainly lots of color in it. Actually, both wines 2 and 3 have loads of color. Yeah, lots of American oak. Again, I got the oak right off the top. There's sort of this resonated character as well as the sort of the coconut. It may not be 100% American oak, but I think there's generally lots of oak. Quite full-bodied, medium acid. Tannins are still fairly high, and it's actually the tannin content here that's leading me to my guess in the end. And I think I know the grape too, but yeah, I like the wine. It's certainly a bigger, I'm going to say, New World style.
Amazing. Sarah, what are your thoughts on wine number 1? Wine number 2, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with certainly all my colleagues. They've really nailed it, in particular the structure of this wine. It's actually quite chewy. And it does have that nice coconut character to it on the nose. That's quite, it dominates a bit on the nose, but on the palate it doesn't. It's nicely balanced. I got a hint of anise, which threw me a little bit because it's not something that I often get in this wine, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what I've been thinking of is wrong. So that's this. I'll try to be less cryptic next time, but
that's okay. And at this point, we are going to throw up our poll, but listen to Michael as he's talking to about wine number 2 as well, and take in who you guys are going to root for round number 2. Michael, what are your thoughts on wine number 2?
So I think we all have a pretty good idea. The American oak is very pronounced. There is this, and all the critics are going to get a nice little chuckle out of this. There's this dusty plum character to it. That's an ode to someone who's not with us tonight. And I also find that there's this cured salami kind of that's part of the dustiness, but there's this cured meats, more beef than pork, I would say. But that specific trait sends me to a very, very special place in the world for where this wine would be from.
Amazing. All right, everybody, get your votes in, and I am going to refer to our critics. Oh, everybody's voting so quickly. This is amazing. Just realized that it counts down as you guys vote. That makes my life so much easier. All right, while our critics are getting their final sense, putting all their thoughts together, we're going to keep this poll up for a little bit longer. Only have about 70 more of you to vote, so please cast your votes as we have this poll up for a bit longer. Amazing. All right, critics, we are going to dive right into it. And we're sorry that we didn't put up the poll the last time at the perfect moment. We were having some technical difficulties, but guess what? We're back on track with wine number 2. All right, so we're gonna stop our poll. All right, John, I'm throwing it over to you. What do you think wine number 2 is?
So I've moved several thousand kilometers from my initial thought. I'll tell you, I was originally in Spain. I thought maybe Ribera del Duero, Tempranillo based. However, working through the wine, and this was a fun one to kind of untangle and get to know. It warmed up in the glass, the wood integrated a little bit better. So I ended up on the west coast of our fair nation in the Okanagan Valley with a Merlot or Merlot based wine. There might be a splash of some other varieties there, those woolly tannins, maybe some Petit Verdot, maybe a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon, but it's got that tight BC Merlot type structure and the plummy fruit and the generous but not over the top wood, I think all fits the bill. I think it's youngish, 2018, Ode to Salami. Thanks, Michael, for that little tidbit. And about $30, I'm going to say. There's some good depth behind this.
All right. David, what do you think wine number 2 is?
Well, I like John's reasoning here, and I'm glad he moved to the West Coast. I'm in the Pacific Northwest, but unfortunately, the thing about the Pacific Northwest is that it includes Canada and the United States. So I've been going back and forth on this. I agree. I believe this is Merlot, or at least Merlot dominant. My original thought was the Okanagan, so I'm going to stay with that. And again, it's the tannic structure, but you can get those kinds of tannins out of the hot, dry interior of Eastern Washington as well. I mean, those two regions are not very far apart. So I'm going to stick with the Okanagan. I'm going to go 1 year younger to 2017. It was quite a good vintage. And wines of this quality from BC are not inexpensive. So I'm going to go $35 on this one.
All right. Thank you, David. Sarah, I'm throwing it back over to you. I know what you said before, but we have some camps going on. A camp is being built in the Northwest. Where are you going? What do you think wine number 2 is?
Well, you know what? I think this is, I think that they're on the right coast. I think that they're in the Pacific. I was actually thinking California, maybe a more coastal region, such as Sonoma, for example, and maybe Sonoma Coast. I think that this wine shows certainly some freshness and modernity. I think it's a more progressive style, maybe harvested a touch earlier. Yeah, I was looking to California here. And in terms of the grape variety, I can't get past Cabernet. I really feel that there's got to be Cabernet because the tannins are really coating my teeth here. So Cabernet, 2017 Sonoma Coast, 2018, I'm going to correct that, 2018 Sonoma Coast Cabernet Sauvignon. And the price here, $28.95.
All right. And last but not least for round number 2, Michael, where are you? Are like where, like there's so many thoughts going on. What do you think wine number 2 is?
A lot of thoughts. I have to tell you, I feel like I'm in a really lucky position to be 4th in this one, and not because I'm able to draw upon everything everyone said necessarily, but because the wine has changed in the glass. And it was a dead ringer as far as I'm concerned when I first popped it for Rioja. It just was. And it is not at all anymore. So I'm so glad that I've had time with it. And I'm going to agree with David and John. And the Salumi is West Coast Canada for me. The Dusty Plum is West Coast Canada. But I think this is a really high quality, high class. I think it's an icon archetype of a BC wine. So I'm going to say BC, Okanagan Valley, probably Osoyoos specifically. 2016, I think it's a bit older. It's a Bordeaux blend of some kind. My guess is Merlot led. And I think it's expensive. I think it's $52.
Wow. All right. That is a guess. John, you are our fan favorite for this round. So let's see how everyone's done. Everyone's rooting for John this round. It actually was really close between a lot of different people. So we had Michael, now we have John. So we're going to find out what wine number 2 is. Opening the amazing Wine-A-Line sack as we go. So we have the Ramirez Piscina Rioja Crianza.
Oh my God.
2015. It's a Tempranillo. It's from Spain. It's from Rioja. And the vintage is 2015. The price is $17.95.
Okay.
Well,
Wow.
we've got American Oak, and so I think that we're on the right trail there.
You know,
I was so rooting for, like with Sarah last round, I was rooting for Mike. He said Rioja. I was like, come on, you can do it.
well, you know what? With the magic of editing, I chose Rioja.
That's right.
Actually, we'll see what our critics say, because I must admit that during the time that we were deciding on wine number 2, they have given points to Sarah for calling Chenin Blanc previously. So we'll see how that goes. We are going to throw it over to our scoring wizards in the background to see how our critics did for this round on round number 2. So I'm going to get them to pop up really quickly. All right. So as you can see, Michael is in the lead and he won the round overall.
That's karma.
Yeah. So he's won the round overall. And David, you are sitting at 1 point right now. John, you're at 3. Michael, you're at 4. And Sarah's at 2. We have some questions coming in from the audience for this round as well. And what I wanted to ask you guys was, why did you move so into this one region? Like, what drove you over into the West Coast area and calling this wine?
I'll say, I think there's obviously, even though it's old world, it's old, an old school, old world wine, it's obviously made in a relatively modern style. And I think that probably threw us off a little bit because for the most part, Spanish wines and especially Rioja wines are very traditional, but this one's got some new world sensibility to it for sure.
Yeah, a bit more fruit bloom to it. That's what got me. I just thought Merlot right off the top. I had no hesitation because of sort of the ripeness and the bloom on the fruit. And Sarah said, it was a very modern style of wine. I didn't linger in Spain at all, even though, because lots of places around the world still use American oak for this style of wine. So.
And speaking of American oak, we had actually 3 questions come in. So if anybody has added in a question about American oak, I'm asking them all at the same time. And what are the flavor characteristics that make you say American oak and its use in the old world?
Coconut.
Very
Coconut,
concise.
cedar, sandalwood, and that melted butter character that has a typical chemical name, DMS, dimethyl sulfide, but you get that a lot more in American oak, I find, than in European oak. And it's also a little bit more resinous. I mean, the grain is different. It splits differently than European oak species. So you tend to get a greater absorption over a shorter period of time of that wood flavor. But it's getting harder and harder to be able to categorically say this is American, this is European oak. Very often wines are blends of both, and even barrels can be blends of 2 types of wood.
Yes, and even within Rioja, traditionally more American oak. Now there's a lot of French oak use, so you might get a mix of both of those.
Yeah, and we did have some follow-up questions come in around that, which is if those are the characteristics of American oak, what are the classic characteristics of French oak as a complement to it? So who would like to answer that one, critics?
Well, I can say I can say that it's a little bit less porous. It's a little tighter grained. Therefore, the flavors, the oak flavors, tend to be a little bit more restrained than those of American oak. It can be as simple as a little bit of toastiness and nuttiness sometimes, and not that intense flavor of coconut. But it also depends sometimes on how much of the barrel is charred or how heavily charred that barrel is too, which can give you more of those coffee notes or less of that. But usually the difference is a little bit more restraint in the character.
Amazing.
And I guess on the technical side here, again, if you look at the peaks and valleys of the aromatic molecules you get in French or European versus American, the peaks are always a little bit higher for vanilla and clove and nutmeg, those sweet baking spices, and coffee bean, coffee ground, mocha, chocolate sort of notes. But again, it depends on a whole bunch of other factors, toasting being one of the most important ones. But yeah, great question.
Thank
Tough
you.
answer.
And okay, so we have a question that I have to say the reason why I'm stumbling a bit on this question is because I think it's one of those questions that sommeliers or people, wine professionals, often ask themselves, which is, I am a strong believer in going with first impressions. Why are you going away from that? So it's a difficult question to answer. And I'm going to throw it to the critics, but I honestly understood everything that they are saying as they were tasting, because I have the wine in front of me as well. So who would like to answer this question?
Well, I did go with my first impression and I was dead wrong. So, and I usually do go with my first impression, and I'm generally not doing very well in this. So it's kind of an awkward thing. Sometimes, the wine is changing the glass. I don't want to use that excuse, but certainly as the wine aerates, its components do change chemically. So the wine is always on the move. Sometimes, I guess, if I feel I'm a certain direction right off the bat, I go with that. But then often there's some niggling thing that's not fitting that first impression, and that will cause me to rethink it. But normally I do go with my first impression.
Amazing.
I will add to that when we taste wines blind, when we know what we're tasting, for instance. So if we go to if we're in a competition, we're judging in a competition, or we go to an event where we're judging 200 Sangiovese or 200 Nebbiolo, it's a completely different thing. But I noticed one of our in the chat, I noticed Odette says, the more you know, the more choice there is. And that's what we're faced in this type of situation is while our instinct tells us, or my instinct in this regard told me that it was Rioja, that it was Tempranillo, then my head starts to swirl with all the other possibilities of red wines that are subjected to American oak around the world, and my head swims, and then I have other things to say and other things to think about it. So it's very hard to pinpoint it when you don't know anything about what's in your glass.
It is difficult, and it did change a lot in the glass, the wine. So we have just a kind of a combo question before we move on to wine number 3. And I really like how this person is recognized. They're like, I know it's a short period of time, but can you please give just like the very bare basics of aging levels for Rioja? And if anybody wants to do that one, as well as give a food pairing. So I'll go around for everyone for food pairings, but if anyone could just give like a quick aging requirements for the full regions of Rioja, so the Joven level, as well as, the Crianza level, and then Reserva and Gran Reserva.
Wow, that's like a
Yeah.
back in school here already.
Version, I know.
That's a 30-minute seminar.
No, I think I've got it. I might have the technical details on the wood aging component part, but okay. So joven means young in Spanish, so no aging requirements. I think you can release it, January 1st, pretty much after the year of harvest. So no aging necessary there. Crianza, you can release a year after, and I don't believe there's any wood aging required. Very often they are, and very often they exceed that minimum period. Then Riserva, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong here, 3 years or 2.5 years now. They keep changing the rules. And Reserva, I know, is 5 years, of which 18 months, if I'm not mistaken, is the current law in wood. So 18 months in wood at least, or maybe longer, but you can't release it till the 6th year after harvest.
Yeah, for red wine.
It's all there online. That's what Google is for these days, isn't it?
Actually, people, if they so choose, I did a Rioja article at the end of 2020 up on Wine-A-Line, and all the aging requirements are listed in that article. So just Google Wine-A-Line and Rioja and you're good.
Yeah. And I think you'll definitely find it out there. And does anybody want to give a quick food pairing for this wine? And then we're going to move on to wine number 3. Sarah, David, you didn't speak in the last question, so I'm throwing it to you guys.
Food pairing, it's a very comfortable wine. I would actually be quite happy sort of sipping this wine as a nice sort of winter wine. I actually find it a little bit soft. I wouldn't mind a bit more acid to actually go with food. But any kind of sort of nice poultry dish, sort of a middle of the road poultry, it's a bit too light for heavy stews and game, but just a nice roast pork or poultry.
Yeah, you don't have to wait on this one. And, that's
No.
a nice thing about Spanish wines and wines from Rioja. They're generally ready to drink, and they've been aged appropriately given their kind of intensity and level of tannin. And it's actually, this was very much a Crianza. It still had a lot of fruit, so it wasn't aged extremely, but it still had definite oak character. So, David, I think that'd be a great pairing.
As a sommelier, it's always really interesting to see what our thought processes are after the wine, but we are going to get on to wine number 3. If you guys have any questions, you can please feel free to keep putting them in the chat. Our critics are going to show their little vials that they have there and pour them into their glasses, their little bottles.
Can't get it open.
Pour out as soon as David can open his. So we're going to get our critics to get acquainted with the wine. We're going to send them back into the critic lounge so we can find out what wine number 3 is before they do. Thank you, critics. We're just going to send you away. We'll be right back. And yes, please, guys, keep putting in all of your questions and we will get to them. If you have any questions about previous wines, I will answer them at the end. But let's find out what wine number 3 is going to be. Wine number 3, we are on our last wine of the evening for our critics to guess, and it is the Frescobaldi Nipozzano. That Crianza really kind of got to me with the level of tannin that's in it. So it's the Nipozzano Chianti Rufina Riserva. The vintage is 2017. The grape is Sangiovese. The region is Italy. And the country is Italy, and the region is the Chianti Rufina zone. We have the vintage at 2017, and the price is at $22.95. I am going to take a quick sip of water from the level of tannic expression that was in that previous wine, and we're going to bring our critics back into the room and see what they have to say about wine number 3. We'll be putting up our poll in between, and don't forget to keep adding in your questions into the Q&A box. And if you are enjoying the wine, please share it with other people as well. So we'll bring our critics right back into the room. And as they come on in here, we do have some questions that are coming in. We did have a question that happened about tannin while we're waiting for our critics to come back on in. And since I was struggling with tannin is that drier feeling that you can get on your palate as it kind of feels like on the tip of your tongue, on the top of your tongue, on the sides of your mouth. For me, it makes my mouth very sticky, which also prevents me from speaking properly. But our critics are back into the room. Welcome back, everybody. Are you ready to talk about wine number 3? Did you get a good sense of the wine?
Yep.
Amazing. All right, give you guys just a moment longer. Get a full idea of what wine number 3 is. All right, and for this round, I am going to throw it over to, let's see, who looks the most ready? I feel like I'm going to throw it over to Michael first. Sorry, Michael. I know you're thinking about things still, but you haven't talked first yet. You are on mute, though. I will ask you to unmute yourself.
I like the combination here of both like brightness and power. There's a restrained power to this wine, and it immediately takes me to a very special place in my heart, though it may not be from this very special place in my heart. I think it's spent a year, potentially at least 2 years in wood, but older barrels, maybe a combination of some French and other, potentially Slavonian oak, larger barrels. And then there's this herbal fennel tea, and it's got a silky glycerin texture to it as well. So I love this wine. I need you to know that. I really do.
You need us to know that Michael loves this wine. All right, next up, Sarah, what are your first thoughts on wine number 3?
Yeah, so this is a really lovely aromatic wine. It's definitely from the old world for me. There's no question about it on the nose. It's got these dusty tannins. It's got these macerated cherries. It's got lots of tannic presence, but it also has great acidity. And also the oak is so beautifully integrated in this wine. So I have a good feeling what Michael's referring to, and I would have to agree with him that this is quite likely the answer.
Amazing. So John, over to you. What are your first thoughts on wine number 3?
I think you're sensing the groundswell of excitement that we're all feeling towards this wine. I think it really fits into a wine drinker's, wine lover's style of wine, all that bright, juicy, tart, red berry fruit, the herbal side, the licorice, the really well-integrated wood, not really a factor here. Nice dusty tannins, not big and chewy and woolly, but really quite fine, but present nonetheless. And there are a range of varieties that can produce this sort of thing. I gave a nod to Sangiovese and Nebbiolo over in Italy. Then I thought maybe a more burly style of Pinot Noir, cooler area, Willamette Valley in Oregon jumped to mind. Gamay I kind of excluded. I think the structure is a little too big here and the alcohol is a little too heavy. Valpolicella crossed my mind, but again, I think there's a little bit too much meatiness underlying here. So I'm kind of honing in on a couple of different parts of the planet, but yeah, really good wine.
He's honing in, but he can't give too much away, John. We're going to throw up our poll at this point in time, but I want everybody to listen to what David has to say too as we throw our poll up, and you can vote on your favorite, who you're voting for this round, who you think is going to be the horse to bet on. David, what are your thoughts on wine number 3?
Well, I really like this wine. I don't love it. And one of the reasons that, and that doesn't mean I hate it either. I mean, it's a very pleasant wine. I'd happily drink it. I'm not going to go through all the descriptors again. I thought John hit them really well. There's a nice complexity on the nose. It's medium bodied. The acid balance is really good. The tannin balance is good. It's fresh. I found it slightly brittle. It was slightly brittle and tannic, so leading me to a younger vintage. I thought it lacked some depth of flavor in the end. Everything up front was really nice. So for that reason, I'm not going to a very expensive wine, but I'm in the old world.
Amazing. We're gonna keep our poll up for a tad bit longer. So everybody, get your first impressions in. Which one of our critics do you think is gonna go win round number 3? You'll have a couple more of you to vote. Please cast your votes. We're gonna keep it up for just a moment longer. All right, I see all the votes coming in. Amazing. All right, so everybody ready to give their first impressions? We are going to take down our poll at this time. And we have our fan favorite for this round is looking like it's Michael again. Wow, Michael, they really like you tonight. That's amazing. Because I'm throwing it back over to you first. What is wine number 3?
Okay, well, this is a tough one, I have to tell you, because my first impression is not sticking again, and I may regret this like I did last round, because I was convinced that it was in the Sangiovese Nebbiolo realm. But there's something about the red fruit here, and David using the word brittle kind of sent me somewhere else. I actually think it is a red blend, but I think it is Garnacha or Grenache based. And the question is whether to go to Spain or to France as a result. And I'm going to go to France. I'm going to say it's from the Rhone Valley. I'm going to say it's 2018 and it's $20, $19.95, could be $20.95, but I'll say $20. And I don't know if I have to get any more specific, but I'll say it's Côte de Rhone Valley.
And what was your vintage again?
2018.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to throw it over to Sarah next. Sarah, what are your thoughts? Are you in the same thought process as Michael with what wine number 3 is? What is wine number 3?
Well, I think that Michael really has a good point about, the red fruit and the flavor profile and the crunch to this wine, but I'm actually going to stick with Italy. And I thought at one point this could be like a good quality Barbera, but I'm actually leaning towards Piedmont now. There's just something about the herbal nature and licorice character and those cherries in this wine and that dried rose petal that. Now I think I do think it's Nebbiolo, but is it Langeroso or Barbaresco? And at the end of the day, I'm going to go with Barbaresco. And the vintage I'm going to say is 2016. Oh, sorry, 2017 Barbaresco. And the price on this from Piedmont, Italy is $42.
All right. Throwing it over to John. John, what is wine number 3? We have 2 different camps forming. So are you in either one of them with them?
I am on the edge of 2 camps. One parallel one and one that's completely on my own. I have to say I was really heavily leaning towards a Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley with a little bit of stem contact, whole bunch, and you throw the whole bunches in and the stems macerate with the skins and the juice and you get a little of that twiggy character, but there's just not quite enough Pinot fruit there. So I'm going to go back to my original guess. I think we're in Italy. I think we're in Piedmont. I think this is a Nebbiolo wine. I don't think it has the depth of a Barolo, not even Barbaresco. I think it's a Langhe Nebbiolo, something a little bit more reasonably priced, but certainly very delicious. And as I said, a style of wine that I really enjoy drinking. So I think it's relatively young, 2017 Langhe Nebbiolo, and I'm paying $29.95 for this.
Amazing. And last but certainly not least, David, what is wine number 3?
Okay, well, I My first nose of this wine took me right to Italy, and I haven't moved from it. A little bit of back and forth on whether it's Tuscan or Piemontese. My first impression was Tuscan, but not necessarily Chianti. And so I'm going to stick with that. So I'm going to stick with Sangiovese, and it may just be a IGT Toscano wine, maybe from the coast, Maremma, something like that. The vintage, again, it's fairly youthful. I thought, at least in terms of the tannin structure, unless, of course, that tannin structure is coming from a grape that's not Sangiovese. But anyway, I'm going to say 2018, and I'm going to go 1995.
Amazing. All right, so Michael, you are our fan favorite this round. Let's see how we do. Everybody, like, you guys have gone into two different camps, so let's see where we lie. We have wine number 3 right over here. And I know for our audience, the tannins from the last wine got me a little bit screwed up. I'm not going to screw it up this time, I promise. So we have, as wine number 3 is the Frescobaldi Nipozzano Chianti Rufina Riserva. The grape is Sangiovese. The region is Italy. The appellation is Chianti Rufina. We also have the vintage as 2017, and the price is $22.95. I was so rooting for you all in this one. You guys were so close. What was the thought process? Or what are our thoughts seeing the wine number 3?
The worst thing is that I tasted that wine 3 days ago.
We all did. We all did.
And it was, again, first impression, that's where I'm going, but clearly it was a night to abandon first impressions.
Hey, it's 2021. Abandoning first impressions seems like it's going to be a yearly thing. It's totally fine. I feel like you're just on par with the rest of the year. Why did you go towards Nebbiolo? Our critics that are in our Nebbiolo camp, why did you go towards Nebbiolo with this wine?
I think it's fair to say that those two varieties, Sangiovese and Nebbiolo, are very frequently mistaken for one another. I mean, it's one of the classic couplings in the world of blind tasting. When you think Nebbiolo, you have to think Sangiovese and vice versa, because they do resemble one another very frequently. You know, this for me, I was struggling. It didn't really sing Sangiovese, and I don't think it's pure Sangiovese. Does anyone have some intel on that? Does Frescobaldi use anything else in Nipozzano? I think they do.
I think they probably do, yeah.
I don't necessarily know, but I'm going to get our scoring wizards to bring up the score at this point to see how you guys did for the round. And hopefully they will give me a direct message to tell me what the additional blends are for it as well. So scoring wizards, I'm going to get you to share your screen at this time, and please feel free to message me on our chat that we have going on. So from this round, we have our winner of the round is David. David, you are the winner of round number 3, and it's also put you in the lead for the absolute evening. So you are finishing at 9 points tonight. John, you're at 6. Michael, you are at you are at 7 in second place, and Sarah, you are at 5. But this was a tough evening. So I'm gonna get you guys to the scoring wizards.
We didn't even break double digits.
I know, it's a little bit different this time around. And our scoring wizards are going to find out if there is a blend on this wine and what's happening with it, and see how it goes from there. But yeah, I will let you guys continue. Nebbiolo and Sangiovese, they have a little bit of difference within the glass, but you can get confused with them. Our chat was talking about how intense this is. But I do have another question coming up here. How much, which is... there's
a bit of Merlot in there.
Yeah, there's a little bit going
Merlot
on.
and Cabernet. Oh, Cabernet.
I have to say this is a very nice one, and I have, I've always thought this is a pretty good value, and I didn't get to taste it with you in the office a few days ago, but
Right.
it's pretty fresh, and it's got nice definition to it, so nicely structured wine for the price.
Well, just to take a bit of a critic's role here, and I talked about it earlier, I didn't think this had great depth of flavor to it. Like the finish was a bit shorter than I expected. So I get the impression it's a nice wine, but when I want more, then the finish is too short, right? And so that's why I pegged it at this. And frankly, and it's 2017, correct? And I think that vintage was a little bit weaker in Tuscany, and that may be what's accounting for that lack of depth for me.
Amazing. So as we are rounding off our evening, we have a couple of questions that have come throughout the night on all of the wines that we've tried and all of the concepts we have talked about this evening. And I want to give our audience a chance to hear from our critics, to see what you guys think about all of this. And one of the questions that came through was respecting the comment about the range of tastes when tasting many bottles at the same time. How do the wines being tasted fit within that range? Not quite sure how that question is, but I think it kind of translates to like how the wines tasted this evening kind of fit within the range that they belong in. So I guess for a Chenin Blanc from South Africa, with the Tempranillo, the Crianza level from Rioja, and then moving into the Chianti Rufina Riserva. So does anyone want to take that on? More than one
Yeah,
critic.
I mean, the overall comment here is, we didn't do very well. And that's a reflection of the varying characteristics of wine. I mean, they're totally a moving target. No one guessed Chenin Blanc for the first wine, although Sarah mentioned it as a possibility, because of vintage, because of whatever. So we all go into these tastings with a very specific of what we're expecting from certain grapes in certain regions, and we've developed that over years and years of tasting the same wine, or the same wines. But there's so many ways that those flavor profiles can change through vintage and sheer winemaking. So it's a very difficult thing.
It's very true. And I'm going to move on. John, I know you want to answer, but I think this is a question that you might be able to answer as well, which is curious to our panel if they do anything to cleanse their palates in between tastings. John?
Certainly at the end of tasting,
Yes.
invariably requires a cleansing lager, as we call it in the business, which we wouldn't do in the middle of a tasting, but around the office we have water. We have sparkling water, I prefer, just to help clean out the tannins. And then a smart thing to do is to move from different categories back and forth. So you're not tasting 40 or 50 big, heavy tannic red wines one after the other. You do 10 or 12, and then you shift into a lighter, fresh, say, white flight of wines, and then you move back. That's the way we run it at the National Wine Awards of Canada. And for me, I think for all of us, that works really well, rather than stick in the same category. Even high acid white wines get a little bit tiresome after 50 or 60 of them. So change it up. But other than that, I don't take anything, a little bit of bread, occasionally some kimchi when it comes into the office, but that's enough, right?
I really seem to love kimchi over there. I'm jealous, very jealous. All right, so we did have a question come in, which actually is a common question this evening. I'm going to throw it over to Michael or Sarah because you guys haven't answered yet, which is how long have you guys had these wines in their divided format before we did this recording this live this evening? Because a lot of people in our questions are feeling like that could be a reason why you're feeling the wines in a different way than they might be in their true form.
It's entirely possible. We received the wines yesterday in these small format bottles. I kept mine in the fridge, red and white, from the moment I received them until pretty much just before we went on for broadcast. Does the transfer and the small vessel and all these things contribute to what we're tasting? Possibly, but remember, we're all in the same boat. So whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage, we're all at the same advantage or disadvantage. So does it affect what we think the wines are? Possibly, but it's really impossible to say, I think.
And I have to say, because I was given the full bottles yesterday, these, as a sommelier, because I do work as a sommelier as well, these are confusing wines. They were confusing to me, and I knew what they were the entire time. So there's aspects of them that were very relatable, but there are aspects of them that were not relatable. Sarah, I am going to throw this over to you. How much time in the glass is required to reveal the full characteristics of a wine?
Oh, yeah. Well, that varies. That can vary quite a bit. There are some wines that change considerably in the glass and others that don't. Wines that are younger and more complex tend to change in the glass. Older wines tend to change more quickly in the glass. So it really does vary depending on the wine. For example, like a really tight knit Cabernet, having it in your glass, it will soften with oxygen. So it varies with each individual wine, I'd have to say.
Amazing. All right. So now we have some questions coming through that are just general questions, and a couple from the first wine that we've had. So we have a question coming in about the Forrester Old Vine Chenin Blanc. They're saying, this wonderful person, Arthur, is saying that it always over delivers for them.
Yeah.
What wines do the esteemed judges have in their cellar that are at a great quality to price ratio? I guess on the same lines that he thinks about the Forrester.
I have the Ken Forrester Old Vine Chenin Blanc in my cellar, actually.
So do I.
I have some.
Yeah, I think it's actually one of the best value white wines to have arrived on our doorstep in 2020. It's a brilliant wine. So, and I'm all about finding really good, inexpensive wine.
It's not just a great wine. It's what every Vermentino, Albarino, and Pinot
That's
Gris
right.
wants to be.
Which we have fully explored today. But is there any other wines that you guys taste thousands upon thousands of wines? Is there any other wines that you've tasted this year that just kind of shine out to you in your brains in that price to quality ratio?
For me, there's one region that stands out time after time and almost invariably terrific value, and that's Muscadet. I would drink Muscadet day and night, weekend, weekday, doesn't really matter. It's usually under $20 a bottle. And if you like lighter, crisper, stony, steely types of white wine, I mean, you can almost, it's hard to go wrong there unless you get something really, really inexpensive, sort of $12 range. But pay $15 and you'll almost invariably be impressed.
And sticking on our Chenin Blanc conversation, we have somebody asking a very local question related to the Chenin Blanc that we've tried, which is regarding the Chenin Blanc, enjoying the 2019 Chenin Blanc from Niagara by Big Head. How would this wine compare in contrast to today's South African Chenin? I don't think that they're having the raw line from Big Head. Hopefully they would have mentioned that. This is from Joanna. So does anybody want to give a comparison between the Niagara and the South African Stellenbosch Chenin that we've had?
Well, the first main difference is that the Ken Forrester Old Vine Chenin Blanc at $18 includes fruit from vines that are 70 or 80 years old. So that's the number one difference, is that these dry farmed bush vine Chenin Blanc in South Africa and in the Western Cape, there are all over the place 30, 40, 50, 60, 100-year-old vines that are going into very inexpensive Chenins and to very expensive Chenin Blancs as well. So that's, to me, the old vine concentration and an acumen that comes from old vines is the number one difference.
Amazing.
I would say, since I tasted the raw Chenin from Big Head over Christmas, actually it was one of my Christmas Eve, I do a big seafood spread every year, and that was one of the wines I picked. And I think it's a beautiful wine. It's a really lovely wine, but it's much more in the Loire style than the South African style. I found, for me, it was a right vintage Vouvray, had all the same characteristics. Terrific wine.
Amazing. And if anyone's tried the Lightfoot and Wolfold Chenin, they're also asking for a comparison with that. So if you've had that before, please share your thoughts. David, Sarah, have you had the Lightfoot and Wolfold?
I have not.
Chenin?
I didn't even know Lightfoot was making a Chenin Blanc. It must be the very first vintage of it. I don't think it's ever come through our awards. I'm just not familiar.
Yeah.
Well, they have a vineyard just a little bit outside of the Gaspereau Valley called the Oak Knoll. Right. And it's they call it their Corton of Nova Scotia.
Okay.
And Lightfoot and Wolfold has planted many varieties, like 1 or 2 rows in many cases of varieties on that Oak Knoll vineyard, including Blaufränkisch.
Cake Francosch. They call it Cake Francosch. They use the
Cake Francosch, of course. It's a Hungarian connection, not an Austrian connection. But they're making a dry Chenin and a sparkling Chenin Blanc.
Okay.
From
work really well. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's great to know.
Honestly, can't wait to give it a try. I'm very excited now that since seeing that question, it's now the thing that I need to buy. But we're going to end with 3 questions for the evening. We have 3 questions that are here, and I think they are really great wine conversations that we can have. So we're gonna just address them really quickly, and then we're gonna round off this Saturday night and thank everybody for joining us this evening. So one of our questions that has come in is, can we get a general comment on oak versus skin, seed, and stem inclusion to create tannins? Or in winemaking, sorry, not to create tannins, in winemaking, that's affecting tannins. Who wants to answer that question?
Wow, that's
I suggest Sarah.
pretty deep question. I have to say that's a simple Saturday
It's
night
a
question.
doozy.
Sarah, do you want to take that? No,
Well,
I can take it.
I can tell you that they're right. All of those elements contribute tannin, right? So they mentioned the skins, the seeds, the stems, I believe, as well as oak. All of those things can contribute tannin. But most of the tannin, the majority of tannin, is going to come from the skins and the amount of maceration time. Now, you can increase the mouthfeel, and tannin really is a mouthfeel, it's a texture, right? And it is accompanied by bitterness sometimes, right? So stem inclusion can give you a little bit more of a tannic edge, but you know, you have to be reasonably well experienced at using stem inclusion, because it can contribute a bitterness if those stems are not ripe enough, for example. So you know, you see this too in varieties that aren't very tannic to begin with. John mentioned Pinot Noir and stem inclusion, and that's quite common. It's common in Burgundy, it's common outside of Burgundy in the New World, like Oregon, where they're producing quite a bit of Pinot Noir and known for producing Pinot Noir. So, and some winemakers will be adamant that they don't use stem inclusion, and some always do, and some depending on the vintage. So, there's, you know, a lecture that can be given on stem inclusion. Pips and seeds, you want to try to avoid that type of tannin because it tends to include a lot of bitter oils. So that's one of the reasons why in Portugal, when they have to do a kind of quick extraction and maceration, they tend to use foot extraction because it doesn't break the pips and give off bitter tannins. And then finally, oak can contribute a tannic element, and especially if it's a newer oak barrel, will contribute maybe a little bit more tannic character and the length of time spent in those as well. But they're generally a lot less tannin than any of the other elements that we have mentioned.
Thank you, Sarah. I like it was a difficult big question, but I really think you summed it up really, really well for everyone. And using Sarah's thing, like tannin has such a physical reaction. And you guys actually all saw me have a physical reaction to tannin when saying our third wine. It has that stick and that weirdness to it. So all of those aspects are part of it. All right, we are gonna finish with our last two questions. Can somebody talk about the convergence of the mono vino idea? Does this make this type of competition tough? From what I know, mono vino is, in terms of how they're referring to it, this is Gloria, who's asked this question, is just a single varietal wine. And how does that make a difference in this type of competition? Gloria, if I'm not right, please put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A. Hopefully I'm correct. I'm going to throw it over to David.
I'm frankly flummoxed by that question. I don't quite understand the question.
I think what the question is in this perspective, from what I'm reading it as and understanding it as, is having a single varietal wine easier when we're doing a blind tasting versus a blend. And I might be dumbing it down, and I don't necessarily mean easier in terms of like something just being more understandable, but like, does having a single varietal wine help?
Oh yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, the personality, the character is more well defined, but at the same time, we're very much aware that there are a lot of the world's wines are blends. There's usually one variety that's the lead in the blend. Particularly when you're in Europe, there's lots of multi-varietal wines that aren't necessarily harder to guess. I think maybe in the New World, there's less of that. So yeah, I mean, we focus, first of all, like the nose focuses you on the variety, and then the palate focuses you on the place. So the easy answer is yes, a monovarietal wine should be easier to identify the variety. Doesn't necessarily make it easier to identify the place.
I think that's a great answer. All right, I'm going to throw this over to John. And then we had one question come in, which I just think is the perfect ender for the evening. So John, what is the difference between natural and organic? And you know the reason I'm throwing this over to you is because this was your prediction at the beginning of the hour. So what is the difference between natural and
I'll
organic?
give you the very, very short answer. There's really no general agreed upon definition of natural, whereas organic is heavily regulated. In order to call your wine organic, or your foodstuffs or whatever you're growing organic, you have to follow very, very strict guidelines. So one is very, very well defined and one is not defined at all. Although, in my definition, natural would have as the starting point, you are making your wine from organically grown grapes.
Amazing. All right. And our last question for the evening, and I will ask this to our critics individually. If you just want to just tell me what it is quickly. What was your favorite wine of the night? It's such a good question. What was your favorite wine of the night? Michael?
Oh, without a doubt, the Chenin Blanc from Ken Forrester is my favorite wine of the three.
Amazing. Sarah, what was your favorite wine of the night?
Yeah, I'd have to say that that Chenin Blanc was lovely. The texture, the aromatics, the length in that wine, like super duper value.
David, what was your favorite wine of the night?
Same thing for me. If you want to bring scores briefly into the equation here, it's the only wine that I would score over 90 points tonight.
Amazing. And John, what was your favorite wine of the night?
None. I didn't get any of them right, so therefore none of them are good wines. Number 4 is going to be the best wine of the night. Now I'm going to go have another sip of the Forrester. Actually, I'm going to have a sip of all 3 of these wines so I can internalize my my errors.
I love that. I also very much enjoyed the Chenin Blanc from Ken Forrester. It was really, really lovely production. But I wanted to thank all of our critics for joining us this evening on our first inaugural episode of Think You Know Wine for 2021. Thank you guys all for joining us, and thank you to our amazing audience. We hope you all have a lovely evening. And I'll let everybody say good night, everyone. Cheers.
Right, cheers.
Night.
Congratulations to David for getting something right.
Finally. Cheers.
Cheers, David.
Next
Cheers,
time.
everyone.